This video is part 2 of a 5-part series in which I analyze Shadow Weaver's arc with a critical eye. If you have not seen part 1, it's very important to have the context from before to understand what I'm getting at here, especially since, as mentioned before, there will be heavy spoilers. Also, as mentioned before, this video deals heavily with themes of suicidality and abuse because the show itself delves into this topic frequently. If you are in danger of taking your own life, please call this number and tell them what's going on. You need to take care of yourself. Alright, on with the video! In the last video, I'd mentioned that Season 1 has a lot of lead up into Shadow Weaver's backstory for Season 2. And right I was, because there isn't much new content for Shadow Weaver's arc, I'm going to be skipping fairly far ahead into the season. Naturally, that means discussing one of the most important episodes and controversial ones in the show, Lightspinner. Because there's just so much to unpack here, I decided to devote a whole part to this episode. We'll be covering Seasons 3 and 4 next time. I'm going to say right now that this episode is controversial with good reason. People have very specific, strong opinions on both sides about whether Lightspinner was always evil and selfish or not. There's a reason for that, which I'll touch on when I analyze this episode. I don't fault anyone for their differing opinions, and I hope you will not fault me for mine. With that being said, let's talk about this episode bit by bit. In the first scene of Lightspinner, we see her creating a beautiful light illusion of a phoenix to teach her students how to do the same. Micah crashes her light illusion, to which Lightspinner responds by casting an even bigger one to dispel his. Following this interaction, Micah tries to flatter Lightspinner to get her to be less hard on him during class. Lightspinner doesn't take the bait, and I'll explain why this is important afterward. They engage in a conversation in which Micah says he wants to learn more advanced magic, and Lightspinner says the guild won't allow him to learn that at his age level. After Micah imitates the head sorcerer with a line that still makes me laugh to this day, Lightspinner tells him he needs to be patient and he must start at the beginning. This scene is very important in my opinion. There's a lot to unpack here, and this entire episode is chock full of character development. First things first, there's a lot of foreshadowing to Lightspinner and Micah's later strife in the illusions. They're basically competing with power, Lightspinner following all the rules and doing everything right, and still getting outshined by a young, rambunctious teenager. It's a very interesting tidbit that I really appreciate. A greater thing to note here, however, is Lightspinner's attitude. I know many people think that she was manipulating him the entire time, seeing as how that's what the showrunner thinks. I'll be pulling some quotes from her after I go over Season 5, but this to me personally is evidence that she was not using Micah the entire time. If she'd wanted to, she likely would have encouraged his flattery, seeing as how he obviously looks up to her. She mentors him with a firm but gentle hand as well. So far, there's no evidence resembling anything like how she treats Catra and Adora in the present day. I obviously can't show the whole episode due to some copyright complaints from YouTube, but I will summarize briefly what happens at the end of each flashback, seeing as how this entire episode is extremely relevant to Shadow Weaver's character. After this flashback, Shadow Weaver lays slumped against the wall with a tired, dejected look on her mask. The next relevant detail comes when Lightspinner agrees to teach Micah more advanced magic. She explains the basic tenets of sorcery and says she only teaches the most talented students. She says Micah is the most proficient student she's ever seen, but he lacks the focus and dedication needed to become a good sorcerer. Micah says he'll prove he's worthy of her training, but she makes him promise before they begin to do exactly as she says. From here, we have a montage of them learning magic together, and consistently, Micah outshines her in many ways, almost teaching her instead. Some people are going to say that this scene proves she was using Micah all along. The two pieces of evidence they often cite are Lightspinner teaching Micah more advanced magic, and her telling him to do exactly as she says. However, I don't agree with this notion. Lightspinner's private training of Micah isn't exclusive to him. She has trained powerful students before. Is she attracted to power? Yes. Is it a stretch to say that she was grooming all those students over the years for the spell of obtainment? Also yes. And as to her request toward Micah, this is silly to me if I'm being honest. Lightspinner is a teacher who's been dealing with a rebellious student, pure and simple. It is not unreasonable to me that she would ask this of him. In the final montage, Micah does what we can only assume is a very complicated spell, and Lightspinner is appalled. She demands somewhat angrily to know if he's gotten outside teaching, and Micah says he didn't, and Lightspinner realizes how incredibly gifted he is. She says that she's going to mold his power, and when he presses her to find out if she wants to teach him still, She says that she does, and tells him affectionately that they're going to do great things together. Just to insert a bit of commentary, this part is adorable, and it makes me happy whenever I watch it. She's a cutie when she's not being a jerk to her kids. Anyway, from there, we see Lightspinner showing Micah the incredible damage done by the Horde. Micah is horrified, and Lightspinner says she has a plan needed to stop the Horde, but that she's not sure the guild will see her point. Micah encourages her, saying that if anyone can make them see, it's her. The scene ends with Lightspinner once again giving him an affectionate look. There's more evidence in the later seasons that Shadow Weaver truly does care about Micah, but to me, this scene is some pretty solid evidence. But what about manipulation? Well, I'll admit it, this scene is purposely written to be ambiguous. We see this a lot in the latter half of the show, where the writers purposely don't give us a stance on Shadow Weaver so that both sides have confirmation of their own opinions about her, but here it shines. And this is a major issue I have with this episode. The first bit is when Lightspinner demands to know who else was teaching Micah. While I don't personally read it as manipulative for reasons I'll touch on later, I can see how someone would see this as isolationist and abusive in some manner. I do think that Lightspinner said this because she's frustrated, a kid who is able to outdo her in magic. There's ample evidence that she feels this way toward Catra, particularly in her later speech to Catra. And yet, I see the other side of the debate too. The other piece of evidence is when Lightspinner says she's going to mold his power. This is one I understand a lot less. If she were doing a villain monologue here, I would think that Micah probably wouldn't be able to hear it. However, we clearly see him respond with the line, "So you'll keep teaching me?" This combined with a very crucial scene in the third flashback convinces me that she was more discussing how to help him match talent with training, which is a common theme among many teachers even in real life. And now we come to a crucial scene in the show. Lightspinner presents her plan to use the spell of obtainment to make the sorcerer strong enough to stand against the Horde. She's rejected by Master Norwin, who tells her that the spell leeches power, turning the caster into a magical parasite, assuming it doesn't just kill them. Lightspinner protests that she's modified the spell, but she is not heard and accuses the guild of doing nothing, although they're perfectly content doing so. Norwin speaks in a condescending way to Lightspinner, telling her that she needs to be satisfied with what she has, but Lightspinner is offended at the assumption and leaves in fury. Again, I'm going to get defensive of my interpretation here, but it's all very crucial to understanding why I had such a major problem with Shadow Weaver's arc and ending. Lightspinner, from what we see with Micah and the guild, truly does want to stop the Horde. I personally find it a bit strange to assume that she was trying to manipulate everyone in her life, particularly since we don't have good, solid, hard proof of similar tactics here to Adora and Catra's treatment. She's also shut down and not listened to because she's distrusted despite her sincerity, which is a parallel to Catra. Finally, just as Catra is untalented and not heard, so is Lightspinner. There's very clearly a similarity drawn between them, and not just in regards to Catra's eventual fall into repeating her mother figure's abuse. The scene doesn't just end here, however. There's more. Following the guild's rejection, Micah enters the building, and Lightspinner goes off about how the guild doesn't want to listen to her regarding the spell. She says that they never listened to her, and if she is to be believed, this means that their rejection and belittlement preceded this particular scenario. In this scene, it's also clear that she has two motives to pursuing the spell of obtainment: to stop the Horde from their conquests, and to harness her knowledge into power to become an even more accomplished sorceress. Micah tells her that she needs to go back and make them understand because the stakes are too high. The Horde will destroy Etheria if they don't stop them. Lightspinner has a clear facial expression of realization at this moment and tells him that if he wants to help Etheria, there is another way to do so, by helping her cast the spell. And this is where I truly, personally believe that Lightspinner did use Micah on some level. Did she care for him? Absolutely. Did she have nefarious goals? Probably not. There is an aspect to this, I'll acknowledge, where she did keep the truth about the spell from him. However, it's important to remember something I think many people forget. Lightspinner said she had modified the spell, and therefore she didn't think it a risk. That would be a reasonable motive to keep the danger from Micah, seeing as how she likely thought there was little to no danger to begin with. Following this scene, Catra enters Shadow Weaver's cell and tells her she's getting sent to Beast Island, and Shadow Weaver simply asks, when? That is, until Catra keeps goading her, to which Shadow Weaver asks to see her old Sorcerer's Guild badge. Catra says that she doesn't get to ask things of her anymore, though she ends up bringing the badge to her later. I'm going to say right now that this is conjecture. The rest of the show completely drops all the nuance and sympathetic edge to her backstory. The consequences of this are discussion for another day, but here's my theory, one I believe is supported by the parallels drawn between Shadow Weaver and Catra, as well as Shadow Weaver's eventual death. Here it is. Shadow Weaver truly did want to die up until this point. She's hit rock bottom and believes there's no way up, and the only person who truly respected her is dead now, or so she believes. This is a very important thing to keep in mind because it's almost a cruel foreshadowing for her death in Season 5. I personally think it's a stretch to say she was lying when her body language and tone both carry a dejected nature. And now we come to the big scene. Lightspinner and Micah cast the spell together, but Micah realizes that the spell is evil and runs away, leaving Lightspinner to be consumed by its darkness. It spits her out, scarring her. After this, the guild comes and asks what's going on, to which Lightspinner rises. She blames Micah for causing the spell to fail, and the guild for not believing in her. Lightspinner then goes ballistic, killing all 3 guild members before screaming that she has become stronger than everyone else. She lifts Micah up, and he's convinced she's going to hurt him. However, Lightspinner doesn't do this. She tenderly touches his cheek before setting him down and teleporting away from him. Later, we see her show up to the Fright Zone with a bandaged face, wearing the garb of Shadow Weaver to join the Horde. There's a decent amount to unpack in this scene as well. First, this is solid proof that whether or not you personally think she manipulated Micah, there was genuine care beneath her guile. Lightspinner had everything to gain by killing Micah. If left alive, he would grow up to be the most powerful sorcerer of his day and would be able to stand against her. Not to mention, she was clearly angry at him for abandoning her. Just as a side note, this ratifies what Shadow Weaver said in the Mysticore episode about her people not understanding her and fearing her. But anyway, the fact that Lightspinner was willing to spare Micah as well as give him a look and a gesture of affection, even when possessed, shows a lot. Moreover, this is a bittersweet, precious misdirect. You think that she's going to hurt Micah, but then you realize she's just saying goodbye to the last person she loves. I'd also like to talk about her joining the Horde. Many people point to this scene to argue that Lightspinner never was interested in stopping the Horde at all, and she was just using it as an excuse to join the Horde and gain more power. However, I don't agree, and I find this to be a bit of a conspiracy theory. Master Norwin clearly stated before that the spell changes people, turning them into parasites. Lightspinner was clearly, undeniably changed by the spell of obtainment. And after this happened to her, who had the most power? Power that, as we'll see in the next video, she needed to survive. That's right, the Horde. Thus, I believe that her motive for joining was twofold: get the power necessary to survive and become strong enough to get revenge on the world that rejected her. And here we come to the climax of the episode, which is arguably the single most important scene for Shadow Weaver in the entire show. Catra comes in, and Shadow Weaver asks to know why she insists on visiting her. With some prodding, Catra asks why Shadow Weaver always mistreats her and why she wasn't good enough, and the answer to this question is astoundingly deep. Shadow Weaver tells Catra that she did it because Catra has always reminded her of herself. She wasn't naturally talented like others, which clearly refers to Micah, and had to pay in blood to get her power. She doesn't see it as fair for Catra to get an easy ride when she had to suffer and fight for her strength. Catra finds this argument bullcrap, but Shadow Weaver insists that it's true and points out that Catra is losing her position with Hordak just as Shadow Weaver did. Shadow Weaver points out that Entrapta had to earn Hordak's trust, and Catra must as well, but she must become smarter and stronger than her predecessor. She also offers a gesture of false affection to her before telling her to come back later for more training. There's a lot to unpack here. First, it should be pretty obvious to anyone listening to her words carefully that this is manipulation. Shadow Weaver still maintains that Catra has to earn love, which is a common tactic used by abusers to guilt their victims into feeling like they're not good enough in their relationship. This is also the sole place in the show where she doesn't use her famous manipulation tone, which is meant to throw the audience for a loop in this scene. Second, as I said in the last part of this series, Shadow Weaver is not lying when she says that Catra reminds her of herself, nor, I believe, does she lie when she says she wants Catra to succeed. Shadow Weaver, with very few exceptions, says what she believes to be true, and she has explained that she beats Catra down in order to make her earn her power. This is consistent with her actions in a few moments where she abandons Catra to go to the Bright Moon. In my opinion, the only time when she's lying in this scene is when she says that she will try to help Catra and stay. But other than that, I believe that she was genuine in this scene. From here, we get a very interesting flashback from Shadow Weaver about when she first got Adora. She enters Hordak's sanctum and he tells her he found Adora while out on an excursion of sorts. She tells him that Adora has incredible power and he begrudgingly lets her take the baby. When she sees Adora, she finds her cute and comforts her, telling her they're going to do great things together. From here, she leaves her prison using the guild badge, going to Bright Moon to help Adora in the present day. In my personal view, this scene shows a middle-of-the-road route for Shadow Weaver between how she was prior to the spell and how she is in the present day. She still only shows interest in Adora because she's powerful. However, when she sees her, she shows true affection. We know this because verbal manipulation is pretty hard to perform on a baby, and consoles her. The motif of "we're going to do great things together" may also imply that she sees Micah and Adora, a child with great power who can replace the one she left behind. It's also obvious that Shadow Weaver's decision to leave Adora was not out of any sort of goodwill. She's clearly still evil. However, I see it as a good sign that she's going to join the rebellion, even for selfish reasons. She's at rock bottom now, and it's hopeful that she might find a way back to the woman she once was. This episode is one of my favorites in the series because of the incredible depth to Shadow Weaver's character. As Lightspinner, she was a sorceress shunned by her peers for her intent to stop the Horde, and ended up tragically as someone willing to join the Horde for the power they would offer. Additionally, her relationship with Micah was complicated and layered as love and jealousy intertwined her into her downfall. The context provided here is set up as essential to understanding her story, and we'll discuss the, albeit minuscule, ways that it impacts her later on. But for now, that's where I'm going to end today's video. What's your thought on the Lightspinner episode? Did you sympathize with Shadow Weaver after seeing her backstory? Do you think Micah is the cutest cinnamon roll ever to walk Etheria? Please let me know, respectfully, down below. I'll be back next week to analyze seasons 3 and 4 in depth. Thank you for watching, and God bless you all.